this school? Who requires a school like Woodstock with its past and with everything that it has to offer today? And what is that everything that it has to offer today? Because in addition to everything else, we're talking about the future at a time when the planet has come through these extraordinary 2 years of the COVID pandemic. And we are being told from every side that nothing will ever be the same again. But nobody quite knows what that means, what's going to change, and in which direction are things going to change. But we're constantly being told that it's all going to be a new ball game now. Well, we have been hearing that for a while. We heard that before the pandemic in terms of climate change, in terms of the upheavals that were going on throughout the world. Now, we thought after COVID, we might have a chance to take a breath, but we don't, because COVID hasn't gone. It's going to be here, and it's something we have to live with. So how does a school, international school, manage at a time when there are these public health threats, for example, which come in the way of travel, which come in the way of exchange, which come in the way of parental anxieties of all kinds? This is not just a question of international travel, it's right here in India. We're facing it right now. And my grandson is thinking of going to college, and his parents are worried about sending him out of Ahmedabad because they think, well, what if COVID strikes again? So we're in with all kinds of existential questions. And then we have this horrific thing which is happening today in Europe of a war in Europe, which nobody could have conceived of. And international education at a time of what? Is it war? Is it peace? Or is it a prolonged period of uncertainty? So I go back to this basic issue of perhaps doing some kind of a SWOT for Woodstock at this time, at a time of so much change, anxiety, uncertainty, and need for hope. What is it that this school sitting on a Missouri hillside offers to the world? And if we can come to some consensus on that, then I think the next challenge is, how do we communicate those strengths and those advantages to potential audiences who might be looking for the kind of education that Woodstock has to offer? So there are two things here. What is that education? And the second is, who needs it? So maybe we should just pause here and first get those issues, some clarity on those issues before we try to go forward. What do you think? Does that make sense?
Sounds good. What do you see some of the strengths of Woodstock education over time too? I mean, you know, we have a long tradition. What do you see some of our strengths being?
Well, if you look at what the world needs, first thing it needs is tolerance and mutual respect, which is being shattered in so many parts of the world, including in both of our countries. So that's a value. That's a value. The values of tolerance, of humanity, of compassion, of caring, which have been so much part of Woodstock's DNAs, are desperately needed. That's one. The other is the whole issue of, how shall I put it? The environmental challenge of climate change and other aspects of that are threatening the planet. The Himalayas, where all of this is being played out. So there is a huge opportunity for those who understand this, that a school which is cradled by one of the greatest ecosystems in the world, which is under threat of climate change, what is the opportunity for learning and understanding by the drawing on Woodstock's strength of using its Himalayan setting as an educational, as a laboratory almost for learning. Perhaps in our time we took this all for granted, but now it becomes not just something you take for granted, but for something that you draw on in a very conscious way in order to pass knowledge and wisdom on to another generation. So I see that the environment as a value system as well as a resource for learning as hugely important. The third I see is that at Woodstock, we don't have to be taught about the importance of being a global community. We have been a global community for well over a century, and we have survived and grown as a global community for all these years. So, what have we learned in the process about international exchange? I think one of the things that we're up against, which is a competitive issue, I suppose, is that so many international schools are now talking about the fact that they not only exist but they produce global citizenship, and that they offer this, which used to be at one time Woodstock's unique USP. Uh, but I don't think that we can say that today and leave it at that. Education for a world of difference, the slogan I think that started at your time at Woodstock. But what does that actually mean now? And what does this long history of international collaboration and of a global community uh, living and working together on a Himalayan hillside, what does that offer today in the context that I have just described? That how can our internationalism, if you like, be made more rigorous as a advantage that we offer to young people who come and study at Woodstock? So I think these are issues that need to be understood. We also have another, I think, huge elephant in the room, if you like, which is the enormous changes that are taking place in the politics of this country, and we don't know where that's going to take India. It's a convulsion not dissimilar to what is happening in the US, where the very fundamentals of the republic are being challenged, are being opposed, and that includes tolerance. It includes respect for minorities, and Woodstock is a minority institution. Soon after independence, Woodstock became part of a fabric where the founding fathers had said that this is a country for all people. And majoritarianism was never part of the ethos of either the freedom movement or what came after that. And today it is the driving force. And we who struggle to represent another opinion, another India, and the idea of India that we all grew up with are being challenged daily, and Woodstock will too. So it's not just climate change, it's not just the physical climate, it's also the intellectual and moral climate, and citizenship climate is also being challenged. So we have all these changes, and therefore I think it's important to understand what is the culture that we stand for, and how do we transmit that culture to another generation. In a way, one can say that Woodstock is not only ahead of its time, it's leading its time, because it's been through so many of the traumas that the entire global community is facing today. But how do we bring that together? And how do we not just perhaps reinvent Woodstock for present time, but also communicate that reinvented Woodstock to the present time?
So I hear a lot of strengths and some weaknesses, and a lot of that stuff is out of our control. Obviously, the political climates, both in India and globally, for example. Um, Also, just the rise of the number of international schools in India and across Asia, and it is a struggle to differentiate ourselves. Um, but I think there are some clear cultural there's a clear underlying culture that I think that is sustained at Woodstock. Um, and you've mentioned tolerance, compassion, uh, and then also just kind of awareness of the environment. Can you talk about, I mean, again, you've been to the school recently and you've met staff and students. Are those values still alive and well? And if so, uh, how would you suggest communicating those? I mean, I think we all struggle with how do you articulate these things that in a way that isn't kind of trite, and global citizenship is a real thing, but how do you get beyond kind of the stock phrases?
Yeah, well, I can't say that I have very much in-depth knowledge of Woodstock as it is today because I've not had a chance to be up there. In November, I was able to get up to the hillside briefly for a couple of days, but I could not get into the campus because of the COVID regulations. I have been in touch with Principal Craig Cook and with Katie Joe and others over the time. I've never lost contact with Woodstock, but I can't say that I have uh, an in-depth understanding of where the board of directors, where the school is on these issues, or whether these issues are uppermost in their mind at all. Because over the last couple of years, for heaven's sake, the whole school has had to be in a disaster management mode, trying to cope with the COVID pandemic, and that's not over. So I don't know what the bandwidth is at the present moment uh, for this kind of reflection, quiet reflection and time. I would say that my own sense is that it better start sooner rather than later because the situation all around us in India and in this region and in the world, and even in the US, where so much of Woodstock support is centered, uh, doesn't allow us much time to dawdle. If we have to put together a strategy for this school over the coming years, and my suggestion is don't look too far ahead. These days, even 2 or 3 years seems to be a long span because of all the uncertainties around us. But let us look 10 years, 15 years down the road and ask ourselves, where do we want to be? And what are the advantages we have to get there? But first, to decide where we want to be. What is the USP for this school in these times with the experience of COVID, with all the anxieties that we now have across the globe on so many fronts, in the context of change that is taking place in India? And to my mind, perhaps what is most significant is that the task for building a context for Woodstock and for communicating that context cannot be done with one school alone. We need partners. And we need partners in India and we need partners overseas, wherever the audience for such an extraordinary institution might exist. So I think, and that's where I think the alumni movement is so important because that alumni is all over the world. And I think it's going to be extremely important, therefore, for the alumni movement. And here I want to make an observation which I think is critical. And that is, so far, the alumni movement has been so dependent on the movement in North America. It is the most vital element of Woodstock's alumni movement. And to my mind, a great failing is that Woodstock does not have a dynamic alumni movement in its own country of India. We're here, we're loyal, we're scattered, but we could never put together something like what you have put together today. We've never had the energy or the smarts to do it. And I think we should, because Woodstock needs that. And not just that, but I see the South Asia region and the Asia region as absolutely critical to articulating the future of Woodstock School, because it now needs to be seen as representing an opportunity not just of India, but of South Asia and of everything that comes with that understanding of a region of the world, a huge region of the world in which such a vast share of humanity exists. And then I would go a little bit further to say that the new constituencies that have developed for Woodstock in its traditional uh, locations of alumni strength also need to be examined. There's this huge Indian American community in the United States that didn't exist before. Where are they in the planning of all this? Because for them, I would imagine Woodstock has something very special to offer of both the new country and the old country. And it's a huge community. I don't know too much about it because I live far away. I don't have that much contact with the US, but it's all around us, right? When you have a vice president who has India in her blood, and all the high profile Indian Americans who are all over the place, where are they in the understanding of Woodstock School? And where are they in championing this Woodstock School? In addition, there is another community which is a subset of the Indian American community in North America, and that is the Indian Christian community in North America. Where are they? Are they looking for a Christian education of the kind that Woodstock has represented all these years? Do we see them as a constituency that would immediately understand the ethic of the school? Not that all Christians may be on the same wavelength as Woodstock, but there must be many who are, many parents who are. And what have we done to tap those sources? Because we cannot do this alone. Woodstock cannot do this alone. It needs to be in conversation with other international schools in India which share its values. It needs to be in conversation with other international schools in the region which share its values. And we need to be re-articulating who are the wider Woodstock community, say down the road, 10 to 15 years from now? And what have we done to reach out to them? There is, for example, I keep thinking of them when I open my computer every day and I get a message from a group of Indians and Americans in the United States who call themselves Hindus for Human Rights, who are fighting the battle on the human rights side on behalf of so many who are suffering in this country from the abuses which the current government is inflicting on us. Now, who are these guys? They're all young people, the young Americans who call themselves Hindus for Human Rights, but they share Woodstock's values. And they seem to be a very active and committed group of people to a kind of understanding of citizenship and of India and of tolerance that are right down the Woodstock street. Has anyone in North America heard of this group or working with this group? Because they are very active and they represent an intellectual resource which to my mind comes very close to us. And there are others, the Indian community in the United States is also divided between the right wing and the left wing, unfortunately. And some of the Indians who go abroad are even more ferocious in their fanaticism than those who they've left behind. So I'm not suggesting anything, any easy solutions. I'm just suggesting a conscious effort to reach out to those who would understand the ethos of the school and its rather complex history, which often does not make much sense to newcomers. They get sort of confused with all this strange history of this bizarre community of people from all over the world stuck together on some peculiar hillside where everything under the sun seems to be happening. And they go sort of, yeah, very, very nice, very exotic, and then they turn away. But what we're trying to say is we're not exotics. We are the present and we are the future.
Mm.
And we just have a head start on that. That's what makes us special.
There you go. Bruce Davis, you have your hand up.
Okay. No, I did. Yes. So thank you. I wanted to make a comment uh, about well, one thing that's really impressed me over the last 5 to 10 years at Woodstock is year after year, the quality of the graduating class at Woodstock has been actually quite astonishing. I've been so impressed by each new class that has graduated, and how bright and articulate so many of the kids are. And the interesting thing since this is Friends of Woodstock School WOSA reunion, here in North America, our alumni base, let's call it, continues to grow, because what happens with 2/3 of the graduating class from Woodstock School, it pretty much goes to college in the United States and Canada. Almost, if you go back over the past 10 years, 2/3 of the graduating students wind up coming to college here, and a lot of them stay on in the States. We have some on our, in the participants tonight, are exactly folks like that. And so our alumni base here in North America keeps growing. When I first joined FWS, I thought, we're going to be a dying off, breed here in North America over time. But I was just completely wrong about that. It's a growing community here in North America. But as Ashoke said, the focus really needs to be on building the alumni community in India over the next 5 years. There's so many, both through students and parents and friends and so on. There's so much opportunity there, and reaching out and cultivating that resource for the school is just going to be terrific. But I am so encouraged by like I said, the quality of each graduating class over the last 10 years. It seems that I have a lot of, I just have so much faith and hope that the school is, it's doing something right, and I think I'm all for. I'm very pleased to see how they've made it through COVID, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the school makes it through the rest of this decade. But I just wanted to throw out those comments about the future of the Woodstock alumni community in North America. I think it's going to continue to grow. I'll shut up there. Sharon, why don't you take questions from people?
Sure. Does anyone have a question? You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Dale Scott.
Yes, I love the vision of tolerance and looking ahead at the environmental threat coming. But I wonder if Woodstock has ever had an understanding of class consciousness. You know, I've come to terms with my privilege. You know, I was a privileged kid in India, and then I was a privileged adult here in Canada and the United States. I've come to see Woodstock, though, as kind of an elite school. The children come from a very privileged background, and they go to a very privileged future. I'm not sure if we're sending out emissaries into the world to have that sense of gratitude toward their privilege, but an awareness of their privilege.
I think from that point of view, Woodstock is pretty far ahead, but it is a threat. I think in ways because certainly in India, and I would say amongst some of the potential Indian parents, they see that eliteness of Woodstock as its brand value. And rather than what we would like to see it, whereas that you're coming here not to an elite school, but to a school which knows it is elite and takes that position as a responsibility for building young people who understand their privilege and who can be committed to using that privilege for the betterment of society. Mm-hmm. A lot of so-called elite schools are facing this. And part of it, I think, is going to be with us because in a country where poverty still is so large, we are elite and we've always been elite. I don't think we should apologize for that. What we should be saying is that this is what we're doing with our privileged position. And that what is it that we're doing is probably something that we now need to articulate much more clearly. You also need to take into account at Woodstock that the fees now are such that only rich Indians can send their children to Woodstock. And that means that's where I think the Indian alumni needs to come in to help build up scholarship funds. Because how are we going to demonstrate that this is a space for all people unless people with modest means are able to send their children to school, just as our parents sent us? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's very much linked with the value system. Education is important. People are demanding a lifestyle for children in boarding, which our parents never demanded for us. Their creature comforts that used to be very, very luxurious in our day are taken as commonplace on the hillside now. So what do you do with a bunch of kids who are glued to their individual laptops and sitting in student lounges, things that of course would have been inconceivable in our time. And for many of whom who think that going out into the hillside is a big stress, whereas all of us were told to get off our backsides and start hiking. So it is another environment, another generation, but you're right. If we are not to be an elite exclusive school, and if we are to use our position to share, because sharing is really what this whole global challenge is all about, we can't be asking for justice in the world and not practicing it on our own hillside. I think Woodstock's social service outreach is fantastic and gives enormous opportunities. I mean, where in the world would another bunch of international students have a chance to interact with village communities and a village school, which is just around the corner from Woodstock? where just to be there is an education in itself. To another set of young people being educated on the same hillside in radically different circumstances, but with Woodstock's support and with Woodstock's understanding, and who see themselves in a way, I think, as part of a wider Woodstock community. That little Kaplani school in itself is like a university, as far as I'm concerned, of opportunity for learning, because it networks into a whole host of villages. And so much kids can learn from those villages, particularly since those are the villages most threatened today by climate change. So I think you're right. We need to, as part of our reinvention, to say, yes, we are elite, but by elite, we mean that we are in a commanding position of some influence, perhaps, and we intend to use that position in a responsible way.
Making me think about Ashok. The phrase that comes to mind is place-based education, and you're talking about it in terms of the proximity to people of much different means and culture and everything for Woodstock students. But there's and you also mentioned the Himalayan environment and just how what a critical laboratory in some ways that the Himalayas are. Just watching, again, we've just watched the snows melting, for example, and the challenges of water in Asia as those glaciers disappear, and there's a lot of things that Woodstock can't escape in terms of its environment. The place is very much a part of our experience, and how do we leverage that? It's a very different things. We're an IB school. We're one of dozens of them in India. Many of those are in urban areas, though, and they're very much day schools where you can't control the environment as much. They're very, very much an elite school, but I think
my hand up like that, Joker.
I think
Oh.
Woodstock has a very unique place that perched on that hillside that impact how we all grew up and how I think current generations are growing up. Can you talk to that?
Well, I think this whole question of growing up on that hillside now has become much more conscious at Woodstock of how the hillside opportunity is to be used. But I think in the kind of circumstances that we are in, we need to re-look at all these resources that Woodstock has and link those resources to a new agenda, not a new agenda, but to a fresh agenda, which addresses a very difficult and uncertain time. We're going to have to recruit young people to come and study at Woodstock in a time that is so full of uncertainty and anxiety on several fronts. So what questions would a parent ask when making the decision to send their children to Woodstock? Whether from overseas, far away, whether from countries nearby, or whether from India. And how do we, I don't know, I can imagine certain questions as a grandparent, but I'm not sure whether my analysis of what parents are looking for these days are okay. Sharon, you will remember that in the, I would say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, many Indian parents saw Woodstock as a kind of route to a green card and a passport into the United States. And I was always shattered by that, frankly. because that's not what Woodstock was started for, but that's an advantage it gave. An American education, so you can get into an American college and you can then settle in the United States and everything will be hunky-dory for you after that, right? I think that kind of mentality still exists, particularly in families which can afford Woodstock. Uh, Fortunately, there are many other schools which can deliver you that same thing, IB and all of that kind of business. I don't think that's so unique to Woodstock anymore. So I come back to this thing that we need to do a bit of research, that what are the parents of today, our kind of parents of today. First, we need to define that. Who is the audience for Woodstock today in these different regions? Because it's not going to be the same answers for all of the constituency. But if we take parental expectations as a starting point, what are those? And what do we have in our history, in our present, which respond to parental expectations? Because to my mind, that's where the dialogue starts. Will you send your child to Woodstock? And then move on from there, step by step, and perhaps regionally, to try and indicate what the strengths of Woodstock are in addressing the needs of 21st century parents for whom Woodstock may be an answer to their dreams for their children. I think that's what we really now need to do. And in doing that, we draw on the past, but we don't use that past as being self-explanatory. It's not to the new generation. Right? We need to, that's why I keep coming back to this fact of re-articulation and possibly reinvention, which is, which I think is important in order to start this kind of planning for the future. And planning for a future which everybody tells us is going to be uncertain and anxious. I think that's one of the big challenges at every stage, no matter what area of work you are in or what concern you're in, the message keeps coming in is that the ball game has changed. Nothing is going to be the same again, on and on and on. But what on earth this means, nobody knows. And maybe it was always that. Maybe it was always anxious and uncertain times, but we didn't make such a big song and dance about it. And now we do.
Aaron, I think David Schoonemaker has his hand up.
Go ahead, David.
No, I think, Ashok, your analysis is absolutely right on. I think we are at a point where we have a marvelous opportunity to restate, to re-envision what the school will be doing over the next 10 years, or maybe 5 years. As said, our future is very much shorter. There was a crisis when the missionaries were American missionaries, at least, and most foreign missionaries were not granted renewals on their visas, and suddenly Woodstock's population declined. Finances were sinking. The school was searching for a new vision, and the whole idea of diversity came up. And then came the question of what was diversity, and diversity can take the form of passport countries or economic diversity or whatever. So going forward, I would encourage first of all, this is really a job for a board, and the board of Woodstock needs to take on that challenge. It is a job that the development office could be very, very helpful with. But more importantly, I think it's input that Woodstock needs at this point. It comes from a much broader base than just its internal elite, I'll call that elite, group internally. It has to reach out and find out why, first of all, why are parents willing to send their kids to this school that's hard to get to. It's up in the hills. It's long ways away from wherever their home is. When they have alternatives today all around them, what makes it different? And can that difference be important? And I could look to give you statistics for private boarding schools in the United States, which charge extraordinary fees and have waiting lists. Their acceptance ratio ranges from 1 to 12 to 1 to 20 applications. There's a huge demand for something there. That demand should be understood. Places like Phillips Academy, St. Mark's, Exeter, there's a number of schools that share this. It's time to learn why they are successful if Woodstock is to be relevant. And the last point I'll quickly make is I think you have the resources, tremendous resources available right in your backyard. That's the parents and grandparents of the students who are there right now. And to seek their input and to get them to be involved in that direction, as well as the students themselves, is what they feel their own needs are. All those are great resources that are readily at hand, inexpensive to get to. Don't take big consultants, but do involve them, and maybe we'll achieve what Ashoke was saying is a sense of alumni, sense of loyalty, sense of commitment to Woodstock from its Indian parents, grandparents, and others, as well as the same from all the rest of Asia, which we know, when I was there, Bhutan, Korea, and others were very important. But same time, why aren't we getting it from some of the other countries? And I think if those things are understood, we will have a very effective new vision. And quickly on vision, keep it simple, keep it achievable, keep it measurable. It's so easy to adapt glorious visions that, as Ashoke said, many schools in India share right now, and they're just as credible for acceptance in universities around the world as Woodstock is. It's going to be a unimportant distinction to just be a feeder for top-notch universities. How do we stand out in Asia that makes people from all over the world want kids to go there? But it has to be measurable, it has to be short term. And I think Woodstock is in real need right now of a new vision. Thank you.
Dushyant, I see your hand up. Would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Sharon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Dushyant Manchanda, class of 83. So I was in Woodstock between 1975 and 83. And I'm currently in the States and have been here ever since graduation. Few observations. I think I've kept in touch with the school and certain board members. I think financially the school's doing quite well from the looks of it. A couple of areas or observations and concerns. One of the reasons why I think certain people haven't gone to Woodstock is the price point has increased pretty significantly. It's now, I think, well into the mid 20,000s per year. And I think for certain families, even in the US, that were considering sending their kids there, they chose not to because of all-in costs going north of $30,000 per year. That was one thing. The other thing that I believe it has affected is I just saw the class of 22's graduation, and I looked at the entire composition of the student body. The class of 83, I would say we were close to about 75 students from 32 different countries. The class of 22 was 90% from India, and then the balance were There were just a smattering from Canada, the US, UK, Australia, and Korea. And several of the US and UK students were actually of Indian origin. That did bother me some, because I think one of the key things that I look forward to when I chose and my parents chose to send me to Woodstock was the diversity and the richness that I would absorb in that whole experience. I think that has gone away. There is also a perception in the US that it's become, basically, it's gone to a price point that's high for a lot of Indian students that may not be able to afford that type of price point. And it's actually even affected alumni that I hear that basically say, if we're going to spend 32,000 between all-in costs to send our kids there are alternatives here. So that is, I know it's a broader discussion, but there was some observations that I felt I'd like to just state it and leave it at that. I haven't said it for any other reason or to engender discussion, but those were some observations for someone who has actively tracked the school and kept in touch with the board ever since graduating in '83.
Thank you. And I think some of those questions will come up in other sessions. There is actually one on Sunday with Principal Cook that I think, he'll be talking directly to that kind of thing. And I'm not sure whether he's still on here right now, but I see Sue Crane has her hand up.
Yeah, I can't figure out how to do it with the button, but I was at Woodstock for 1 year only. I was there little bit older than Dushyant there, and it was a third. The price point wasn't an issue for my family, only because my father taught at a university, so I didn't never have to pay college tuition. My college fund got me to Woodstock, and my family was middle class, lower middle class. And so I think the price point is important, but I think the other thing that differentiates Woodstock as a boarding school, or any school that purports to say, oh, we're giving you a full multicultural immersion, but is not a boarding school, is that, and Alan, I'm sure, will be more than able to talk so much more than I am about boarding, but a couple of things. The time frame that most of us are at Woodstock are incredibly formative years, whether you got there 2 days before your 16th birthday, or whether, like some of the folks in the panel last year, you had a little tag on in your pocket like Paddington Bear and were taken up in a dandy when you were 6. The kind of formative years that we had with students and faculty from all around the world is essential. By the time you are 18 or 19 and get to college, at least if you're an American, you're pretty well set. You're pretty well set. So I think that is a real key piece there, is being in boarding, and the fact that it's formative, and frankly the ability to handle the anxiety. I mean, the stories of how people arrived and the reasons that they arrived at the school that were generated last year. I'm a social worker. My husband's a clinical social worker. Frankly, harrowing, including my own. But you know what? We all survived, and we made it to this safe place. And that safe place was full of people who didn't necessarily look or speak or think like the people from where we came. And I don't know how to package that. I'm not in marketing.
Sharon, can I speak now?
Sure.
Okay,
Welcome.
I just want to address some of the really important points that were made by our esteemed speaker about the change that is taking place all over the world with the kind of political leadership we have. And I remember your point about how we can influence. But I think that's been what Woodstock has been able to do. It's been able to produce a lot of people who have been able to influence in all sorts of ways the direction which is taken in their communities and maybe even the world at large, because many of us have worked for international organizations like the UN. My sister is working for them now. I think it's a really critical issue that we cannot overlook. And I want to go back to the point that was made by Dushant, which is that the complexion of the school is changing, but the context within which the school exists is no longer what it used to be. The context within which we exist in the United States is no longer what it used to be. And it's not just because of the pandemic, it's also the fact that there's an upheaval going on in the world, of what direction we're going to take. Are we going to be less tolerant, or are we going to be more inclusive? It's uh, it's a really it's a really difficult time, and if Woodstock can somehow keep its head above water, I think Woodstock has the tools and the history to possibly affect incremental change that will take us away from intolerance. I think that that point cannot be overlooked. It was really important. Mona Lisa made that point, and I am 100% with Mona Lisa on that. I don't know if you want to address that further, sir. You made that point about what's going on in India and the U.S. and how it impacts all of us. Do you want to address that any further?
I think I would indeed, but that would take another hour or two. But I think what you've said is critical. My sense is that we really have to find uh, others who share our concerns and who would value Woodstock and who perhaps don't even know that it exists. In the global community, there are now many great minds who are um, challenged by these same issues and who are thinking about it and who are talking about it and who are writing about it. I think we have to make a conscious effort to find at least two or three of these people who have done so much homework and say that here's a school which represents some of the things that you are worried about and that you value, and which represents in some modest way the future that you want. And try and see if we can build a core, a community of champions who may be from our community, but maybe from outside our community. There are a lot of them, right? How accessible they are, I don't know, but I think we have the kind of network and we have the context to make that. I just say one thing, for example, this towering figure called the Dalai Lama, who is accepted around the world as a compassionate leader, has links with Woodstock School. We seem to have forgotten that man, but he was important to us at a time when we gave him and his people a kind of anchor which they desperately needed. And he's never forgotten that. At what stage could we get the Dalai Lama at least to give his blessings to this school? Because I think that's important. He keeps saying he's not going to be around forever, so we better hurry up. But to my mind, there are people like that. There are other thinkers. Amartya Sen is one of them, for example, who would understand the ethos of the school, would see its value in global terms, in regional terms, but also from an Indian perspective. And although we cannot get, we are not politically, we don't have any clout, but there's one constituency which I know nothing about, which has always confused me so far as Woodstock is concerned. And that is, where on earth is the Church of North India in terms of Woodstock's future? Is it there at all? I don't even know what kind of an institution the Church of North India is. But it certainly seems to me that this is a time of wake-up call for the Christian community in India. And it needs to draw on all its strengths. And Woodstock School happens to be one of those strengths. Whether they have the the savvy to even understand that, I don't know. But we've had Church of North India people on our board. But to the best of my knowledge, the Church of North India is not a force in Woodstock's sort of thinking about the future. Now, there may be different opinions as to whether we should go to a church institution in order to spell out the future of a school which has rather a secular mooring. But on the other hand, I know many people who are Indian Christians who share every single thing that we've discussed so far. And I don't know any of them who is really involved with Woodstock. And it sounds to me that at a time when minority communities are under attack, the Church of North India should to see the significance of this school in its own understanding of advocacy, of the relevance of minority institutions to the future of India. So I think that constituency, I don't know how to reach out to it, but some of you may know better than me. But to my mind, it's just something that's always hovering in the background. In my time at the board, it used to come up in strange ways, but no one ever addressed this head on, except for the late David Scott. David, I think, understood the importance of this. He understood also the divisions within the churches and all the politics that go on in these religious institutions. But he would probably have been a pathfinder. But it seems to me that somewhere in this whole discussion, there needs to be at least a reference to the Christian community in India. Unlike St. George's, which is down the hill from us, the Catholic community is much better organized than the Protestant community. It seems to have, to put it in some other way, a chain of command where people can go and get advice when they are. I don't know whether Woodstock gets any advice from the Church of India at any time. But I do think we have to learn from this. I'm not suggesting that we in any way give up our secular view, because I don't even think the Church of India would want that. But is the Church of India a strength to Woodstock School is a question I have in my mind. I don't have an answer, but I do think there should be one. Because if it's a Christian international school, we've not taken away that adjective, and why should we? It's needed now more than ever. What we mean by a Christian international school in India, that's what requires redefinition, perhaps. And is the CNI in any way a partner in this? Should it be a partner in this? That's all. That's the question I have. Because it's one thing to take on a school, it's another thing to take on the Christian community in India.
Thank you. Don Emerson, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm class of 1957. I missed the bulk of the opening discussion, and therefore what I am about to say is perhaps redundant or irrelevant or both, for which I apologize. Listening to just the last few minutes and what limited knowledge I have, very limited indeed, of Woodstock today, there are obviously two trends which were pointed out earlier that I think bear attention and probably has already drawn a lot of attention. Let's call them valorization and Indianization. Valorization, by that I simply mean that if it costs $20,000, $25,000 per year tuition, then clearly Woodstock is appealing to a financially slender sector of the potential audience that could send their kids to Woodstock. And then, of course, the question is, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not trying to adopt a political position on behalf of the proletariat, or for that matter, on behalf of the elite. But it does seem to me that the implications of that for the experience at Woodstock are definitely worth exploring. Perhaps we can even do that at some point during the reunion. And then there's Indianization. Now, back in 1957, there's no question Woodstock was, how can I put it? Yes, it was in India. It had Indian participants in terms of faculty and staff, also in the student body, but it was not an Indian school the way I gather it is now. If 90% in the class of 2022 are Indian, and I'm not sure whether we should say from India, including individuals whose nationality is not Indian. I mean, I was the son of a foreign service officer based in Pakistan. There was no international school in Karachi at that time, and so my parents sent me to Woodstock. And so I don't want to misinterpret the 90%, but the 90% is almost 100%. And here is a suggestion. I don't want to talk about secularization because that would take us in a whole nother direction. And I gather, especially from Mona Lisa's remarks that he just made, that secularization is really not in the cards. Unless you argue that secularization can include a deep respect for religion, including for the Christian religion, and perhaps the challenge in this regard within an Indian context is the, how can I put it, the risk, the threat, if I'm not speaking out of term, of Hindutva. The Modi administration has not demonstrated perhaps the kind of openness, trans-religious openness that one would like. But let me leave that aside. And with regard to Indianization, here's just an idea, and then I'll be quiet. And, at the college level, I happen to teach at a university here in California. At the college level, it's a long tradition, the year abroad, right? The year abroad. Now, high school is different, but couldn't one imagine an arrangement, especially given the income that 20,000 plus per year implies, an arrangement whereby a student, perhaps on a strictly voluntary basis, not necessarily built as obligatory into the curriculum, would spend some time outside of India at a country, perhaps that's a whole nother topic, which countries where, and one would have to have an arrangement that would link Woodstock to an educational institution in some other country that would, in the end, provide that sort of extra boost towards something closer to an internationalization, not just an Indianization, that I think in a way Woodstock even now represents. Because the argument against what I'm saying, one of the arguments, would run as follows. Precisely because of the cost involved, the Indians who come to Woodstock are already probably highly cosmopolitan. And in fact, they may spend their summers on the Riviera in France. They may already have global access. And so it would be redundant and a waste of time and money to arrange for some kind of, junior year abroad. But if I'm wrong about that, then perhaps Indianization, which is great. I mean, India is obviously, will turn out to be the largest country in the world once they overtake China in terms of the population. And so obviously there's nothing wrong with turning Woodstock into a national institution. But I think we all, especially those of us who remember the past, which was much more international, in fact, perhaps excessively so. One could even argue that to some extent, the foreign character of Woodstock might even had a touch of sort of, colonialism, although I think that would be going too far as I'm concerned. But these are just some ideas. Is there, in fact, some way of avoiding the parochialization, to use an extreme term, that fully fledged Indianization might possibly imply?
I think that's a very important issue, and perhaps it needs to be flagged Because what do we mean by Indianization? That the India itself has changed so much in the demographics. It's no longer a question of passports. It's a question of what do those passports actually represent. And you're quite right. What we are talking about is a cosmopolitan, diverse community. And that quality can no longer be evaluated just by looking at people's passports or even the color of their skin. I think that's a very real challenge to redefine the diversity that we are looking for and to ensure that that diversity is part of Woodstock's future, because that's what gave Woodstock all the strengths that it has brought up to this day. But Indianization is probably not even a choice. The school is in India, and it is, I've been saying this for years and years and years, it is an Indian institution. It has always been an Indian institution, and that has been its strength, not its weakness. It has been an Indian institution which has reflected a vision of this country and of the world, which was part of the freedom movement. And that's why Woodstock flourished after freedom. So to my mind, and that's something that Woodstock has never really paid much attention to. It's been often so hung up in trying to say that actually we're international, that we've forgotten that the real strength of Woodstock comes from an understanding of what is international, which was uniquely Indian. And that's what gave it its strength. Why else would the freedom fighters like Sarojini Naidu and Vijayalakshmi Pandit send their children to Woodstock while they were rotting in British jails? You know, we have to understand that. And to my mind, that is also where people like the Dalai Lama come in, because his understanding of what is global is so overwhelmingly powerful, and it transcends these sort of narrow counts of who we are by the citizenship that we show. And you're quite right. The so-called Indian contingent there probably does spend its summers on the Riviera. And to me, that's the problem. That's not the solution. That we don't have enough Indian students whose parents have to spend the summer sweating it out on the plains. But it's a question of ensuring a kind of diversity. And there's no simple way about this. I come back to this fact that the product itself, the culture itself, needs to be re-articulated so that all these different audiences begin to understand what this is. It's very hard to capture it in a brochure or in a talk, but we have to try. And to my mind, one thing that might make it easier is to have the kind of personalities who represent the culture and the ethos that we are trying to communicate. So that we can say that this is what we stand for, and these are the kind of people who understand who we are. So if you don't want to delve through pages and lectures, will this help you to understand who we are?
Fascinating. Okay. Anybody else want to add something?
I had my hand up.
Okay. Hi, Mary.
Hi. So I'm thinking back to anywhere from the 40s to the end of the 70s. And Woodstock was not just about the children who went there. There was a whole community on the hillside. And that was a significant contribution to my family's experience at Woodstock, is not only being in boarding school. So I'm just seeing that my battery's died. Got to plug in. So as far as the radical change of it being this community of only young people and the few teachers that they have. It's a very small community. It's not, I mean, there used to be for 2 months at least of the year, a whole community up in Landar and into, in my class, we had even people who were living in Missouri area in the bazaar. So I'm just wondering how can you say, there's a communal aspect that I identify as being what Woodstock was valued for. That communal aspect, that there was diversity, it was a different kind of diversity. We all might have looked the same or looked, most of us looked the same, but we all came from different backgrounds in terms of denominations and background of different beliefs. And that was the diversity that we had experienced. So when we talk about globalization and when we talk about the realities that are around us, as well as the values that we would like to see Woodstock continue to reinforce, that sense of community is one big question that I always have about the kids from the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s now. Are they experiencing any kind of community? Because as Susan Crane Lewis mentioned, she went as a 16-year-old. I mean, it's quite a different experience when you just have other 16-year-olds, 17, 18-year-olds that you relate to and a few handful of teachers. How can you know about the world? And that's where, for me, I feel the alumni should be engaged with the school. Those who want to be, of course, offering their talents, their skills, and experiences, so that there is this somehow sense of community. And as we move along in history, those of us who are eventually going to die away, then it becomes much more of an international community, not just mostly North Americans, which I would say the alumni is still, the majority is North Americans. I'm not sure, but maybe others have overlapped. So I just wanted to add that as an additional value that we need to consider. Tolerance, yes, but tolerance outside of any kind of sense of communal understanding, global communal understanding, I think is limited in what kind of tolerance it actually is. So
Well, I think, Mary,
yeah.
you've touched something which is very important, because the hillside community was such a strong part of what made Woodstock for us in those days. And the hillside has changed. The kind of culture that used to bring parents up from the plains for 2-3 months of the year. I mean, that was such a strong part of Woodstock's culture, and that has changed. But one of the things that maybe we don't take into account is what an extraordinary hillside still exists. Landar is one of the most extraordinary communities in this country. And you have to pick up the Sunday newspaper sometimes to read about it, because it's recognized as one of the most extraordinary places in the country. Because the kind of people who have come to Missouri, who have come to Landar, it's one of the richest sources of creative minds that we have in this country. In our time, Woodstock, the Landauer community was not known as a literary hub. It is today, right? And Steve's presence is part of that. And he's part of a community of writers who have given Woodstock and that hillside a distinction which it never had, and which are now part of a diversity which is greatly valued. There are some wonderful things going on that hillside, and it is a very diverse hillside. How far Woodstock uses that, I don't know. But the hillside now is a much larger hillside than just Landauer. It includes what happens in other parts of Missouri. It also includes what is happening in the city of Dehradun, which is now a huge city, full of institutions. Many of these extremely sympathetic to the kind of things that Woodstock is doing. So I think we have to now perhaps also take a look at what we call the hillside and say, what is this hillside? Who comes there? Who lives there? The hillside is now a 12-month hillside. It's not just a seasonal hillside. There are people who live there right through. And there are people who go there and want to live there forever. Right? It's one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the entire country of India. So there are all kinds of changes that have taken place on that hillside, which we should also take into account. And there is a very rich and diverse community there which values Woodstock. And I think that's another connection, which I'm glad you raised it because it doesn't come up very often. But the fact that Woodstock has become, that Landauer has become an intellectual haven of sorts, balanced by becoming a major tourism destination with all the pluses and the minuses that come with that, has redefined this hillside and transformed it. And yet, in many ways, the hillside has been able to been able to sustain its pristine quality, which has been a huge achievement. And one of the champions for that have, of all things, been the defense forces, which sit on top of Woodstock. So we might have champions where we least expected it, but we have to understand that. And let me just show you, I never knew when I was at Woodstock that there was a Catholic church on top of Kellogg Church. I never knew it until just the other day when Victor Banerjee, the great actor who lives behind Kellogg Church, told me, have you seen the restoration of the Catholic Church? I said, what Catholic Church? He said, don't you know, the one that your friend Stanley Pinto in Bangalore and I have restored? And he took me up the hill through the cantonment to this Catholic church, which I never even knew existed. I had a Catholic, Italian Catholic classmate, Rosanna Lorenzoni, and whenever she wanted to go to Mass, it was expected that she would trek all the way across to Barloganj. So of course, she never went to Mass. But I had no idea that there was a church right above the school. So there is so much in that hillside which needs to be explored and to used when we talk about diversity. So I just want to say that the Landauer community is an extraordinary one. How that Landauer community 2022 connects with Woodstock School is a very good issue that you have raised. And I think the advantage we have now, which we didn't have back in those years, is that there is now a permanent hillside community. If we expand the understanding of hillside to valley as well, because there are just enormous a number of creative people just down the hill from us in Dehradun, who share every one of the concerns and values that we've been talking about for the past hour. So I think that requires a very conscious effort at mobilization and at bringing together. And one of the things that has played that role already is the Hannafil Center. The Hannafil Center throughout this region is respected as an extraordinary symbol of Woodstock outreach and almost symbolic of what makes this school so special, not just to one community, but to a whole community of people nearby and far away. That's been an astonishing achievement, which possibly we haven't realized how important it is. But it's known around the country and particularly in this Missouri region as being an extraordinary facility and an extraordinary example of Woodstock's sharing and its outreach.
Thank you. That was interesting. And I just shared in the chat an article that Ashoke had actually circulated a while ago about some of those neighbors, talking about, it's Ruskin Bond and Ganesh Sele and the Jabberkit Reserve. I can't wait to get back and see that reserve. It just looks amazing. But there, yes, there are.
Let's also mention that yes, you're absolutely right. There's not just Hannaford Center now. There's the Jabberkit Nature Reserve, which is simply phenomenal, and there's a very strong Woodstock tie to that, right? It's there because of the Woodstock ethos.
Yep. I have a strong sense of what I have a sense of what my understanding of the Woodstock ethos is, but and I think we've talked a little bit about tolerance, but again, I've been living in the US and doing education for a while, and the whole idea of tolerance and diversity, it's such a loaded and politicized and caricatured kind of concept in a lot of schools. And I think one of the things that I valued about Woodstock was that it was actually seen as a positive. It wasn't something that we had to deal with or that we should be dealing with, or it was very much seen as something to embrace. And I hope that's still the case now. But while I was there as a staff person, it was very much like, oh, you're from where? Oh my goodness, where is that on the map? Let's talk about your name. Let's talk, just very, very much. You're not just a number. But you're a unique individual whose the diversity you bring is something that makes the community richer. And I think, again, I don't know how you market that. I don't know how you package that, but I did work at a United college, which again has a very diverse population because it's structured that way. They recruit, a couple people from each country every year. So it's extremely diverse, and they also valued the diversity. But they did that by labeling each of the students by their nationality. So, okay, that's the Ugandan student. That's the kid from the Maldives. We all knew where they came from, whether as some sort of, I don't know, symbol of like what that culture might be, or these poor 16-year-olds are being asked to and what do you do in your country about X, Y, or Z? And they're like 16-year-olds and they have a certain passport, but that doesn't mean that and a certain life experience, but they don't represent a country. And I think, Mara, when you talked about we all came from different places and we all had our own backgrounds, which were complex. I think, I think that Woodstock is a place where you have the time to get to know each other well enough to really value those, not as superficial differences, but as actual worldview kind of shaping differences, if that makes sense. Having conversations about arranged marriages, with people who are in an arranged marriage, for example, in my class was just fascinating to me. And they had the same passport as a lot of other people, but a very different life experience. So, Craig, that's your job, is how to package that. And I see your hand up, so I'm going to stop talking and call on you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Sharon, for leading this rich discussion. And thank you, Ashoke and others also for chiming in here. It's been fascinating, and I would say you're all on the right track, because these are all the issues that we talk about at a board level, at a staff level, and you'll hear more about that in my formal time in 2 days, I think, the last day of the retreat, so, or the reunion. We've got a student retreat right now that I'm going to excuse myself for. We've got a 2-day student retreat going on, and it's been great to see students back. We have 483 students on campus, which is just right at our max, really, capacity. And so, you know, I would say on the what's interesting on the diversity front, just a couple of things. We've just revised our grants policy, and so our whole price point issue, that should never stop any student anywhere from being able to attend Woodstock. So we are seeking to address that, and so we're excited to roll that out. The other thing is, you know, the cosmopolitanism that's there, the diversity, right? How do you measure diversity? It's quite different, as several have pointed out in this discussion. Diversity isn't the same today as it was 50 years ago. And just to give you some facts to chew on, even during the pandemic, just the 2.5 years, our passport holder measure of diversity has gone from 50% Indian national passport holders to 75%. But that's a trend that we're already reversing. And that's just one measure that, in a sense, it's very superficial. Already in this class, incoming class, we have so much diversity represented regionally. And so that's a whole nother issue. Partnerships has come up, and we are partnering with all kinds of folks. One particular idea I just want to share, and we'll talk more about it, is we have an idea to look at an alternative offsite campus, still within the state of Uttarakhand, but where we engage with co-curricular students from technology, but engaging in interfaith dialogue and peace building. So that's something that's in the works. And part of the structure that will lead us there is that we are in good shape financially. We also are in good shape academically, in the sense of we're just about to start our reaccreditation cycle. And we, of course, are accredited by 3 different bodies, and that would be the Council of International Schools, the International Baccalaureate, and Middle States Association. And CIS is the one that really leads that process. And they've given us, because of our health, the ability to choose a second pathway, which is so fascinating and innovative in terms of accreditation, those of you that have done accreditations in education for your career. And what it is, they have 4 domains, and we've chosen the domain of global citizenship and intercultural learning because Woodstock wants to be an international leader in that. Actually, we have such a rich history in this area, and we need to take it to a next level. So what that means is that instead of going through a typical accreditation process where you tick the boxes or you're meeting the standards here, there, everywhere, it allows us to focus on 3 to 6 projects. And one of those is this idea of the interfaith dialogue for our students in peace building, which I think is a great skill. You know, the other little fact that I'll share with you too, to chew on further, even in these next 48 hours before my session, is they have, you know, we only had 3 students graduating of 80 students that graduated last May that are attending university in India. Okay, so what do you do with that? And they're all actually going to Flame University in Pune, which I visited there last spring, and it's a fascinating model, and it's really one of the more innovative higher ed models that you'll find in India. And it's a classic liberal arts university, and one that actually our Woodstock students would be very adept at, in a sense, familiar stylistically in its progressive approach to education. And so that's just an interesting fact. So we're still sending some, as Bruce said, 50% or more to the US, and then another at least 25% going to Europe for their university options. Canada also included in that 50% in North America. So those are just some thoughts I would share, but thank you for the rich discussion. It's been so helpful for me to hear this, and we'll continue executing all these great ideas.
Thank you. I'm aware that it is 11:30 on the East Coast right now. And it's hard to tear away from this discussion, but we have some more days coming up. So my proposal is to adjourn, but I'm also happy to keep going if people want to talk.
There's just one
Sure.
comment I noticed in the chat box, Sharon, where somebody
Okay.
has expressed a concern that maybe we start wallowing in nostalgia and we don't get to the practical aspects of moving ahead. I would say don't knock nostalgia, because love for this school and for that hillside is where it all belongs. But we have to be sure that our nostalgia produces some practical solutions for the many problems that Principal Cook has just explained. So I think nostalgia is our strength. It shouldn't become a puddle in which we get stuck. And hopefully we're not going to be, by the looks of the conversation so far. I say that because at the end of the day, it is love for this place and what it represents that brings us all together in the first place. And the quality of that relationship is so precious, and it is so fragile, and it is so difficult to explain or to articulate and put on paper. So what we have, we better hang on to and give it a practical bent.
Absolutely. I think you said at one point, education is our investment in the future. And I think for many of us, the future is looking very much like we need to invest, values that I think many are rooted for many of us at Woodstock and in our families of caring, serving, also valuing creativity, valuing critical thinking, taking risk. Lots of things that we kind of grew up with on the hillside that can perhaps be manufactured in other places, but no matter what generation we were there, I think all of us on this call can go, oh yeah, there was something a little bit different about that kind of education. So how do we, what do we want to preserve? How do we build it up? How do we make sure it's that our investment into the future is being wisely, is being cared for, and we're investing in the right things. So I love that idea of how do we bank stuff, into the future. So Ashok, I really appreciate you getting on. I'm really glad you could get on, and we will be back on at 10 a.m. East Coast time, 7 a.m. West Coast tomorrow. Everything is on FWS.org. There are the pre-recorded bits that from tonight you can see anytime now, but there'll be new material being released through the weekend. And then we're going to be trying to take these recordings and making them available into the future as well. Yeah, so go to FWSWOSA.org/2022. Jim, you have your hand up. Are you just saying?
I'm saying good night. It's past my
Bye,
bedtime,
Jim.
but
It's past
hello,
a
Ashok.
lot of bedtimes.
Shabash.
Did you say 7 a.m. tomorrow morning? West Coast of the United States?
Wait. I will double check that. An minute.
Nay by nay.
Yeah. 7 a.m.
7 a.m. West Coast.
So Kim, the good thing is, the upside of this reunion is that we have a lot of Indian involvement. The downside is that's 12 and a half hours, different time difference. So in order to get and you'll see the next programming, a lot of it is coming from India. And to be able to include everybody, we have to go early. Shallow, what can we say?
Just
You can do it.
I
Don't have
can
to
do
turn
it.
on the camera.
Nostalgia. Here's the nostalgia.
That's
Yeah.
right. 7 o'clock up in the morning, climb up to Kellogg Church.
That's right.
Okay, so 7 a.m. Just FYI, it's Jamie Alter, who is unbelievable sports broadcasting type, and Suhail Tannen. So Jamie's class of '99, Suhail's from '06, and I think Ajay Mark will be on there again. Most of them are in India and being willing to come on. After that, there's a live concert again coming a lot from India as well as from other places. So yeah, it's worth getting up. Yeah, it's good to see.
You've done a great job, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sharon.
Okay, thanks
Thank
all
you.
for sticking with us. It's great to see you all.
It's great. Thank you.